Hey everybody, it's me, Rumi, the comic book poser, and today I'm here to welcome you to Enter the Poserverse. Read a bunch of books last week, and it's time for me to tell you what I think my top 7 books are from last New Comic Book Day, and if you're missing out, you can pick them up on this New Comic Book Day. So find out what my definitive rankings are after this.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Before we break into the top 7 books of last week, I am closer and closer on my march to 500 subscribers, and I said once I hit 450 that I would announce what I would be both doing for my 500 subscriber giveaway and what I would be giving away at 500 subscribers. My plan is tonight on Popular Opinion's channel on his weekly show Wheel of Misfortune, either in the pre-game conversation or in the post-game conversation, I will unveil to the world what you can do to enter my 500 subscriber giveaway, and I think I might have come up with something kind of interesting to do to then get you on a rig wheel. But I've got a bunch of sweet things that I will show on this Thursday's quarterfinal round of Comic Book This or That, which is happening on my channel on Thursday night starting at 8:45 Eastern. So without any further ado, here we go. Coming in at number 7, from AWA Upshot, you have The Resistance number 6 by J. Michael Straczynski, Mike Deodato Jr., and Lee Lowridge. I came late to the party on this book, that this was one of the AWA titles that I was missing a book somewhere in the middle and had to pick it up on order. And it's an interesting take on a superhero narrative, and this is really the only kind of superpowered tale that's not like ghosts and shit that is happening in AWA's universe for now. So what you're starting to see is the rise of the group in terms of getting ready to kind of fight back against the state. That I feel like there are very few things that I can mention in this book that won't spoil what happens at the end. But I will say that I think Straczynski has put together one heck of a book, and Mike Deodato Jr.'s art, especially on the final 2 pages where you're left wondering what exactly is going to happen, does a brilliant job wrapping this arc up. And I believe this is one of the 2 AWA titles that was announced for a second arc. It does a brilliant job kind of setting things up for part 2, which we'll see, at some point in the future. So I really enjoyed this book. I feel really bad being late to the party and reading it, but it's good. You should pick it up when the trades come out. I think late October or in November, if I remember. I'll post the date somewhere here on the screen when I'm editing this. But it's good. Coming in at number 6 from Oni Press is Rogue Planet number 5 from Cullen Bunn, Andy McDonald, and Nick Filardi. I'm real bad at reading previews and solicitations apparently, because this is one of several books this week that hit the definitive end of the story and not just, the end of an arc. And everybody else knew this was the end of Rogue Planet, apparently, but me. And, as I was getting ready to go on This Week in Comics last Wednesday on Comic Burrito's show, I hadn't read this book yet, and someone was like, yeah, this is the end of Rogue Planet. And they told me that about a couple other books, and I got mad, because I liked it a lot, but Cullen Bunn is writing so many amazing horror stories that I can swing a dead cat and hit 1,000 Cullen Bunn books to read, but I think he did a really good job with this one in terms of looking at kind of space horror. What we've discovered from this book, throughout, the last 3 books is that really what is happening to everyone and everything on this planet is a byproduct of fear. Somehow that, the fear, the panic, the things that we exude create a shift in conditions, and it creates all of the, attacks. It creates the beings that started popping up out of nowhere, and it really kind of comes to a good end of understanding all of those things across like the middle third of the final book, that even the crew kind of starts to acknowledge that fear is the driving factor of what has caused their nightmare on where they're at. This book takes several heart-pounding twists and turns throughout the last maybe 5 or 6 pages, especially when we get to the sections where the woman from the crew starts to understand the importance of the crystals. And then I think this does kind of a brilliant job ending in terms of looking at what may happen for the inhabitants of the planet. Could there be a spin-off for this book? Maybe. Like, it might just be a, here's what this planet looked like before everything started going wild and people got scared of everything. But I think it did a really, really, really good job of of hitting home kind of this narrative of fear that's been spread throughout the book, and kind of watching how things get worse as individual members of the crew started to freak out. So this was another really, really good short-run indie book, and I'm excited for more Cullen Bunn horror. On Saturday, on the Mad Cave Studios showcase, he announced that he is writing on the horror anthology that they have coming out with this year's Talent Search winners, and he announced that he's got another book of his own coming out through Mad Cave, so I'm real excited. There's a lot more Cullen Bunn to be had. Coming in at number 5, the other AWA title that wrapped up this week, Year Zero number 5, by Ben Percy, Ramon Rosanes, and Lee Luffridge. Again, I've talked each week about why this zombie tale is interesting in terms of the standpoints that you see in terms of each individual character, how they are kind of surviving, or cluster of characters, how they are surviving and attempting to thrive in this zombie apocalypse. I really like how we start to see the progression of the women in Afghanistan. I thought that was really, really cool. The fate of Bunker Guy was interesting to me, because remember in book 4 we find out who was on the other end of the radio that he had been talking to, and we find out what happens with that coupling. And the kid in the church, the Ronin, they all had very, very good stories, and I think it's the samurai, the Ronin, who kind of gives us the most direction in terms of what we might expect from the next part of the arc, because this is the second AWA book that was kind of mentioned for another arc coming out in, I think it's next spring. But what really got me were the final 2 pages. That this is something that I don't think, or the final page, we haven't seen any of that imagery throughout, and what is kind of unveiled in the very last panel is something that makes me want to go back and reread the previous issues to see if I can, maybe follow some breadcrumbs backwards to see if that reveal is something that I could have predicted if I read a little harder, or if it's just an oh shit moment that's going to set us up real good for the next book. Coming in at number 4, from Image Comics, is Nailbiter Returns, number 5. This book has just been heart-pounding to me, that with the way that the original Nailbiter book ended and we thought everything was done with not just the Buckaroo Butchers, but the Nailbiter himself, here we pick up from book 4, where we think the Nailbiter has joined the band of copycat Nailbiters, or copycat Buckaroo Butchers, and has started attacking people. But then this takes a wild turn in learning that there's not just like a copycat of the Nailbiter, but someone who almost looks like a clone of him. We start to figure out, a little bit more as we piece through this, what actually has happened in the time off between the end of Nailbiter and where we're at in the storyline of Nailbiter Returns. And we start to maybe figure out that there are players behind the scenes of the investigation of the new band of copycat butchers that may know more than what we of the readers have been led on to know. This just got wild. It keeps being wild. It's a reason why I love this series. Coming in at number 3, another book that I didn't know was ending here is Alienated number 6 from Boom Studios. It's by Cy Spurrier, Chris Wildgoose, and Andre May. This has been a rocky, emotional road that we've gone on in terms of looking at the relationship of each of the kids named Sam and Chip the alien. We saw in, primarily the last 3 books, the impact their relationship with the alien had on each of them. We saw elements into Sam, Samir, and Samantha's dark pasts, and they all kind of reacted differently in their connection with the alien. And we start to kind of see Chip as more of a entity and less of like the little alien blob that we've seen throughout the book. We really start to explore more things that we, have maybe been inferring about Sam after this interaction with Chip. But this book, ratchets up the intensity real hard. There's a really big action sequence in the middle of the middle of the book, and then once we kind of, hit the end of what happens to Chip and Sam, you're left on this big kind of questionable hanging note. And thank God there was this epilogue here that we can flip through in the last 3 or 4 pages that kind of offer some closure to the story, especially for Samantha. But this is something that I've liked a lot. It looks at, the different ways that people are damaged and how this alien kind of helps us explore some of those broken elements of individual personalities. I think this is a story that I could share with a bunch of my students who I know have dealt with a variety of issues, and of course making sure that they're okay with, the content, that there would be some kind of content warning before, I give them a book that explores suicide and, thoughts of murder and that kind of stuff. But I think it does a good job of relating to an ageless audience, because we all have that experience, or if you're younger, will have that experience of this kind of coming of age tale where you're dealing with all of the bad shit that life deals you. And we get, some really good relatable elements throughout this book. Coming in at number 2 is Philadelphia number 8 from Image Comics by Rodney Barnes, Jason Sean Alexander, and Luis NCT. Book 7 was all about the rise of Jupiter in terms of that character's backstory and how they have that connection to pain and slavery, and ultimately the relationship between Jupiter and Abigail Adams. This book, we get to see Jupiter to his fullest and wildest potential with the other remaining members of the underground coven of vampires, if that's a good word. That gets wild. There's a really interesting focus on Sangster Sr. in here, that we know that he officially decides to go to his final resting place at the end of the first arc. There's this lovely River Styx kind of thing going on with him in a conversation with death as he is finally seeking out his wife who passed before him. And this is another one of those books that it gets really sweet in terms of looking at the relationship between Sangster and his wife. And then this is one of those books, again, in the last 2 pages, I just start laughing out of nowhere. That there haven't been a lot of big humorous moments, that there's been a lot of black comedy throughout Barnes's run, but the final 2 panels, and I'm laughing because I'm looking at it again, it's hilarious in terms of, again, looking at whether or not Sangster Sr. hits his final relationship with his wife, but also there's a lot of Lucy pulling the football away from Charlie Brown, and the way that it happens in the last couple of pages, setting up that final panel, is the funniest thing that I've seen in a while. That for my pick of the week, I thought I may have been pulled into calling my shot on this a little early when I was on This Week in Comics with Todd and Nick on the Comic Burrito channel, that I read everything else, and this book was hands down my favorite. It's the much hyped #1 issue from the man who keeps on delivering, James Tynion IV, from Image Comics, Department of Truth #1, and it's Tynion, Simmons, and Bidkar. I like this book so much that this was going to be my giveaway book, like Miles to Go #1 was, and then I realized, I guess, dumb luck after we pushed the stream back a week, that I got the secret variant to the book, the Lee Harvey Oswald cover. I was like, I'm not giving that away, especially as much as I like this book. So I like conspiracy theories. I'm not a big tinfoil hat guy in terms of I believe all of them, but I think conspiracy theories from time to time do a good job of like questioning power, questioning the relationship between truth and the government, and really, conspiracy theories help us look at how people understand the world better, because we all may believe slightly different things in terms of conspiracy theories, and that helps us look at the lens that others kind of play with. So the beginning of the book is this really, really, really wild art that, as we start to look at, a man who is being interviewed and we don't know really what is going on, we discover that these men are interviewing Lee Harvey Oswald shortly after the Kennedy assassination, and then there's a big jump forward in time. I was listening to Dustin and Nick from Two Brothers Comics last night talk about how they didn't like this book as much as they thought they would, or Nick liked the story but not the art. But I think the art in this book is intentionally grainy, because what we learn throughout this book is that, we may need to be questioning our understanding of reality. We may need to be understanding our relationship with what truth is and with what the world is. And the interview we see between like the journalist and the two men from the government throughout, like, we get some of this really, really interesting narrative on conspiracy theories through the like discussion of what happened at the Flat Earth Society convention. And then when we hit the end of that convention is when like it really starts to go wild based on what we may discover at the Earth's end, and really what this idea of the Department of Truth really is and really serves in the book. And I just think this crazy distorted art is really, really interesting in terms of making us feel uncomfortable and making us feel kind of shook. And this would be the same kind of experience that you would have if you were, in this man's shoes. The unveiling of the woman in red in the last couple of pages was very interesting. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, search the B cover for this book, the Jenny Frisson variant, where it's, I think it's a negative space cover, but it's the woman in like a red dress, red shoes, red scarf, and you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. But that reveal was also kind of cool. And then the other thing that I've heard people complain about was like the corny reveal at the end of the first issue. But again, I think that's necessary in terms of turning our understanding of the world, of history, of current events on its head, and getting us as readers really invested into this what-if scenario. So I think Tynion has not knocked it out of the park and has another book that, I'm going to buy a bajillion copies of as I find them, right? That I'm gobbling up every variant of Something is Killing the Children. I am in love with his work on Batman, which issue 100 comes out this week. And then we've got the Department of Truth. That is something else that I'm just gonna... So what do you think? Are there any other books that you would rank higher? Are there things on this list that you loved? Are there things on this list that you didn't like? Let me know down in the comments below. Remember, you can find me a couple of times throughout my random content drops throughout the week. Remember, tonight I'll be on Popular Opinions channel at 9 o'clock Eastern as a contestant on Wheel of Misfortune. And then you can find me live on Thursday night as we wrap up the quarterfinals of Comic Book This or That. So as always, thanks for stopping by, and have a good one.